3 hours before the convoy stopped on that forest road, Nnenna Trump was pouring water into crystal glasses and counting doors. For exits. 2 visible. 2 disguised as service panels behind the drapes. She had found them on her first shift at the Gilded Lily, the same way she found them everywhere, not by looking, but by feeling where the air moved differently. The Emerald Room was the restaurant's most private space. 12 tables, all empty tonight except one. Darkwood panels on every wall. Chandeliers that burned soft gold and made everyone look expensive. The kind of room where powerful men said things they needed witnesses to forget. Nnenna was very good at forgetting. She set down the water pitcher and smoothed her apron. To anyone watching, she was just the tall, quiet server with the steady hands. She had worked hard to look exactly like that. Ordinary. Invisible. Safe. But her eyes never stopped moving. The Korean delegation had arrived first. 4 men in dark suits. Shoes polished to a mirror shine. They sat with the careful stillness of people trained not to show what they were thinking. Nnenna recognized the posture. She had worn it herself. Once in a different life, in rooms a lot more dangerous than this one. Kwon Dae-Sung arrived 8 minutes later. He walked in the way men walk when every room has been cleared for them in advance. Unhurried. Certain. 2 bodyguards flanked him. And a third, a broad man with a jaw like a concrete block, stationed himself near the main door. Nnenna noted his name from the briefing the restaurant manager had nervously shared with staff that morning. Oh Jae-suk. Senior Protection Detail. 15 years with Kwon. She noted something else too. Oh Jae-suk was watching the wrong door. His eyes kept drifting to the service entrance on the left, the visible one, the obvious one. A man with 15 years of experience should have known that the obvious entrance was never the problem. The problem was always the one nobody was watching. Nnenna refilled a glass that didn't need refilling and kept moving. The toast was scheduled for 9 o'clock. It was now 8:43. 17 minutes of smiling, pouring, and measuring. She let her gaze travel to the younger delegate near the window. Bae Sung-jin. She had clocked him the moment he walked in. He was maybe 30, sharp-featured, with a small pin on his lapel that the others weren't wearing. He smiled at all the right moments and laughed one beat after everyone else. The way people laugh when they are listening for something other than the joke. His glass had been full for 20 minutes. He hadn't touched it. Nnenna moved to the far side of the room and adjusted a napkin that was already straight. From this angle, she could see the tall window behind the delegation's side of the table. The Gilded Lily sat on the 4th floor. Across the narrow street was the Harmon Building, mostly empty offices, renovation tarps on the upper floors. Scaffolding on the east balcony. Good elevation. Stable surface. Unobstructed line of sight directly into the Emerald Room. The cold feeling she had learned to trust settled into the base of her spine. She had left this life. She had packed it into a box, taped it shut, and taken a job where the most dangerous thing she handled was a corkscrew. She had told herself, every single morning for 2 years, that staying quiet was the same as staying safe. She had been wrong before. Bae Sung-jin shifted in his chair and adjusted his lapel pin with 2 fingers. It was a small movement. Almost nothing. The kind of gesture a nervous man makes without realizing it. Or a signal. Nnenna set her tray down on the service cart and looked at the window. Then at Kwon Dae-Sung's white dress shirt, bright as a target under the golden light. Then at the scaffolding across the street, where something in the shadows was catching the light in a way that draped plastic sheeting never did. Glass. Curved. Precise. 11 minutes to 9. She picked up her tray and walked calmly toward the kitchen, already calculating the angle, the distance, and exactly how many seconds she had left to decide who she was going to be tonight. The kitchen was loud and hot and smelled like sesame oil and braised meat. Nobody looked up when Nnenna pushed through the swinging door. The line cooks were plating the final course. The sommelier was uncorking a second bottle of ceremonial soju with the focused expression of a man who believed this was the most important thing happening in the building tonight. He was very wrong. Nnenna moved to the small window above the prep station, the one the kitchen staff used to check the weather during long shifts. It faced east, toward the Harmon Building. She stood on the bottom rail of a stool and looked out at the scaffolding across the street. The tarp moved. Not from wind. The night was still. She stepped down and stood for a moment with her hands flat on the steel counter, breathing slowly. The way she had been trained to breathe when her heart wanted to run ahead of her brain. In for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. Think in straight lines. Facts first. Feelings later. Fact. Bae Sung-jin had not touched his drink. A man who wasn't planning to drink at a toast was a man who needed to stay sharp. Fact. Oh Jae-suk was covering the wrong entrance, which meant either he was incompetent or he had been told to look the wrong way. Fact. There was a lens-catching light on a balcony with a direct view of the table where Kwon Dae-Sung was sitting in a white shirt under a chandelier that made him glow like something placed deliberately in a frame. Conclusion. The toast wasn't a celebration. It was a countdown. The sommelier lifted his tray and headed for the door. Nnenna followed 2 steps behind with her own tray. A fresh water pitcher, and a plan that was still half-formed and fragile at the edges. The emerald room had settled into the warm, heavy atmosphere that comes just before a formal ceremony. The delegates were sitting straighter. Kwon's bodyguards had pulled back slightly, the way trained men do when their boss signals that the room is supposed to feel relaxed. Kwon himself was leaning back in his chair, one hand resting on the table, looking like a man who had already decided tonight would go his way. Hwang Min-kyu rose from his seat. He was the oldest man at the table, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the slow and deliberate movements of someone who had learned that powerful men don't need to rush. He accepted the glass of soju the sommelier poured with a small bow and held it at chest height. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when everyone understands that the moment they came for has arrived. He began to speak in Korean, low and measured. Something about strength through alliance and the long memory of honorable men. Nnenna didn't need to understand every word. She understood the rhythm. She had stood in rooms like this before, behind people like this, and she knew what a closing speech sounded like. This was a closing speech. She positioned herself near the service cart at the edge of the room and angled her body toward the window without turning her head. She let her eyes go soft, the way you do when you're trying to see everything at once instead of one thing at a time. There, on the scaffolding, a shape that was too still to be a tarp and too deliberate to be coincidence. Hwang Min-kyu lifted his glass higher and smiled across the table at Kwon. And then Nnenna saw it. A small red dot, no bigger than a ladybug, appeared on the white tablecloth near Kwon's hand. It moved, slowly, with a patient, unhurried drift of something being guided by a careful eye and a steady trigger finger. It climbed the front of Kwon's jacket, paused at the second button, then settled, with horrible certainty, in the center of his chest. Kwon Dae-Sung raised his glass to meet Hwang's. The red dot didn't move. Nnenna's tray was already in her left hand. The water pitcher was already in her right. The distance between her and Kwon was 11 feet, 2 chairs, and about 1.5 seconds if she moved now and stopped thinking about what happened the last time she decided to save someone's life. She moved. She didn't run. Running would have caused panic, and panic would have scattered people in unpredictable directions, and unpredictable people got shot. She walked fast. The kind of fast that looks like an accident waiting to happen rather than a decision already made. Her left hand tilted the tray just slightly, enough to make it wobble. Her right hand brought the water pitcher forward. She let her foot catch the leg of an empty chair as she passed it, a small, clumsy stumble that made one of the bodyguards glance her way with mild irritation. Good. Let them see clumsy. Clumsy was safe. Clumsy was invisible. 8 feet. Hwang Min-kyu was still speaking, his glass raised, his eyes on Kwon. The rest of the delegation had lifted their glasses too. Bae Sung-jin's hand was around his glass now, finally, but his eyes were aimed just slightly to the left of Kwon's face. Not at him. Past him. Watching for something. Waiting for the sound. 5 feet. The red dot had not moved. It sat in the center of Kwon's chest like a period at the end of a sentence, calm and final. Kwon was raising his own glass now, chin lifted, the ghost of a satisfied smile on his face. A man who thought he was closing a deal. 3 feet. Nnenna dropped the water pitcher. It hit the floor with a crash that made 2 delegates flinch and caused Oh Jae-suk to spin toward the sound with his hand inside his jacket. In the half-second that everyone's eyes moved toward the noise and away from the table, Nnenna's left hand swung the tray sideways and connected squarely with the base of the open wine bottle sitting at the table's edge. The bottle didn't break. It spun. A full, graceful rotation that sent a wide arc of deep red wine across the white tablecloth, across Kwon's raised hand. and directly into the front of his white shirt in a splash so dark and sudden it looked, in the low golden light of the chandelier, exactly like a gunshot wound. Kwon lurched backward in pure reflex. His chair tipped. His glass left his hand and shattered against the table's edge. Soju and crystal scattering across the delegate seated to his left. His body dropped below the table line just as Nnenna's hand found his collar and pulled hard, using the last of his momentum to bring him the rest of the way to the floor. The window exploded inward. It wasn't a large sound. That was the thing people never understood until they had heard it. A sniper's shot through glass sounds less like a bang and more like a sharp, expensive crack. The way a mirror breaks when something heavy clips its corner. The bullet passed through the space where Kwon's chest had been and buried itself in the dark wood paneling on the far wall with a sound like a fist hitting a door. Then the room truly broke open. One of the bodyguards was shouting. A delegate had flipped his chair going backward. Bae Sung-jin was on his feet. And for exactly 1 second his face showed something that had nothing to do with surprise, a flash of cold calculation. There and gone so fast that anyone who hadn't been trained to read faces under pressure would have missed it completely. Nnenna didn't miss it. She was already moving. One knee on the floor, her body angled over Kwon's to keep him low. He was alive. She could tell by the way he was fighting her, pushing back, trying to rise. The instinct of a man who had never once in his life allowed himself to be put on the ground by anyone. "Stay down," she said quietly, close to his ear. Not a request. He went still. The wine was spreading across his white shirt in a slow, dark bloom. In the chaos of the room, with glass on the floor and men shouting in 2 languages, it looked exactly like what she had needed it to look like 2 seconds ago. A wound serious enough to justify the fall. Kwon turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were sharp and steady, the way eyes get when fear burns off and leaves pure focus behind. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't gratitude either. It was the sound of a man rapidly rearranging everything he thought he understood about the last 5 minutes. "Yes," Nnenna said. "And we have about 40 seconds before whoever sent that shot realizes they missed." She had 40 seconds. She used the first one to pull Kwon fully behind the overturned table. "Stay flat," she said. "Head below the table line." He looked at her the way powerful men look at people giving them orders. Like the idea was interesting, but had not yet been approved. She didn't wait for approval. She was already moving, staying low, heading toward Oh Jae-suk, who was crouched near the main door with his weapon drawn and his eyes scanning the broken window. "Jae-suk," she said, keeping her voice even and low. "That window is the kill zone, not the exit point. If they have a secondary shooter positioned for exactly this reaction, and they will, anyone who moves toward that window is a target. I have protocol," he said tightly. "Primary exit, main corridor. Your primary exit puts you in a straight line from the Harmon building for 11 seconds, Nnenna said. 11 seconds is a lifetime if they have a second rifle set up. She watched the calculation move across his face. He was a good man, she could see that, experienced, loyal, trained. He just hadn't expected tonight to require thinking outside the blueprint. "There's a service corridor behind the kitchen," she said. "It runs along the building's interior wall. No exterior windows, no line of sight from the street. It comes out in the parking structure on the building's north side, which is completely blocked from the Harmon building's angle by the elevator shaft." Oh Jae-suk stared at her. "How do you know the layout of our evacuation blind spots?" "Because I mapped them when I started my shift," she said. "It's a habit. Can we move now?" He made the decision the way good soldiers make decisions under pressure. Fast and without vanity. He nodded once. Nnenna moved back to Kwon. He was still behind the table, which she appreciated, though his expression made it clear he was not enjoying the experience. "We're going through the kitchen," she said. "Stay behind me, stay low until we clear the dining room, and please don't speak until I tell you it's safe." "I don't take orders from, with respect," Nnenna said. "The last person giving you orders almost put a bullet through your chest. I would like to try a different approach." "Sir." The sir landed at the right moment. He stood, staying low, and gestured for her to lead. She moved fast through the chaos of the room. The delegates were pressed against the far wall, guided there by 2 of Kwon's guards. One guard was on his radio. Another was positioned near the broken window at an angle that made Nnenna wince. Too visible, too exposed, but there was no time to redirect everyone. She pushed through the kitchen door with her shoulder. The kitchen had frozen. The line cooks were backed against the far counter. The sommelier was crouched under the prep station with his hands over his head. The sound of the gunshot had reached them as a mystery, a crack, a crash, and then shouting in 2 languages, which was somehow more frightening than understanding would have been. Service corridor, Nnenna said to the room, loudly and clearly. Behind the cold storage unit. Everyone who is not security personnel, go there now and stay there. Do not use the main door. Most of them moved. People in crisis respond to a calm, certain voice the way a drowning person responds to a hand. They grab it without asking for credentials. She crossed the kitchen to the cold storage unit, a large upright steel door on the room's interior wall. She pulled it sideways on its runner track, exposing a narrow gray corridor behind it, unlit and smelling of old concrete. This is your evacuation route, she said to Oh Jae-suk. He looked at the dark corridor, then at her. Then he reached for the flashlight on his belt and clicked it on without another word. Kwon Dae-Sung looked at the narrow passage, at the wine still dark on his shirt, at the woman in the waitress apron who had just redirected his entire security operation in under 60 seconds. After you, he said. It wasn't gracious exactly. But from a man like Kwon, Nnenna understood. It was as close to thank you as the next few hours were likely to produce. She stepped into the corridor and didn't look back. The safe house was a dry cleaning business on the 4th Street, behind the financial district. From the outside it looked exactly like what it claimed to be. Steamed windows. A faded sign, the faint smell of chemical solvent drifting under the door. Inside, past the rows of plastic-wrapped suits and the humming machines, there was a back room with concrete walls, a steel table for chairs, and lighting that made everyone look like they had something to confess. Kwon Dae-Sung sat at the head of the table and looked like a man who was deciding how angry he was allowed to be. His white shirt was still stained. Someone had offered him a clean jacket during the evacuation, and he had refused it, which told Nnenna something about the kind of man he was. He wanted the reminder in front of him. He wanted to look at the dark red spread across his chest while he talked, so that whatever he was feeling stayed sharp and didn't soften into relief. She respected that. She didn't say so. Oh Jae-suk stood against the far wall with his arms crossed, and the specific expression of a man who knew he had failed at his one job and hadn't yet figured out how to carry that. 2 other guards flanked the door. Nobody had offered Nnenna a seat. She sat down anyway. Kwon watched her do it. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement. Not quite offense. He let it go. Your name, he said. Not a question. An opening move. Nnenna, she said. I work the evening service. Section 3. Tables 9 through 14. You work the evening service, he repeated slowly, as though testing the words for structural damage. And in between pouring water and clearing plates, you identified a sniper position across the street, calculated the angle of the shot, and decided the most effective way to move a grown man out of a bullet's path was to pour wine on him. Red wine, she said. The color was important. The room was very quiet. Explain that, Kwon said. If I had pushed you or shouted a warning, your bodyguards would have responded to me as the threat. Someone grabs the boss. You deal with the person grabbing the boss first and ask questions after. The wine looked like blood. A man who appears to be shot gets covered and moved. Your own team's training worked in our favor. Kwon was quiet for a moment. He turned the empty glass in front of him slowly with 2 fingers, around and around, watching it the way people watch things when they are actually thinking about something else entirely. Where did you learn to think like that? He asked. Experience, Nnenna said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Oh Jae-suk shifted against the wall. Boss, I can find out who she is within the hour. We don't need to sit here and, Jae-suk. Kwon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You were watching the left door. The big man's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The shot came from the Harmon building, Kwon continued, still looking at Nnenna. East side, which means the line of fire ran directly through the main window at a downward angle of approximately. What? 17 degrees, Nnenna said. Give or take, depending on which floor they were on. I estimated the 4th level of scaffolding based on where the reflection was sitting relative to the chandelier's height. Something shifted in Kwon's face. Not softening exactly. More like a door opening a small, careful amount. Waitresses don't estimate sniper trajectories, he said. No, Nnenna agreed. They don't. She folded her hands on the table and met his eyes without looking away. This was the moment. She had been running from moments like this one for 2 years, keeping her head down, staying small, convincing herself that silence was a kind of armor. The bullet hole in the Emerald Room's back wall said otherwise. I was a tactical intelligence analyst, she said. Private sector. High-level protection and threat assessment. I was very good at my job until someone decided it was more convenient to make it look like I wasn't. The room stayed quiet. Kwon stopped turning the glass. Tell me, he said. Everything. She didn't start at the beginning. She started at the end, because the end was the part that still had teeth. 18 months ago, Nnenna said. I was leading threat assessment for a protection detail in Busan. Senior client, high-value summit. The kind of job where everything has to be perfect because the people in the room don't accept any other standard. She paused. We had a breach. Someone fed bad intelligence up the chain, coordinates that put our outer team in the wrong position at the wrong time. When the threat came, they were looking the wrong way. She said it plainly. No drama in her voice. Just the flat, careful tone of someone who had gone over the same ground so many times that the pain had worn smooth, like a stone in a river. 3 men died, she continued. One of them was my partner. His name was Chitty. The room stayed still. Even Oh Jae-suk, who had spent the last hour looking at her like a problem to be solved, was quiet now. The firm needed someone to blame, Nnenna said. I was the lead analyst. The bad intelligence passed through my desk. On paper, it looked like I missed it. In reality, the file had been altered after I signed off on it. Timestamps changed, access logs wiped. Whoever did it knew the system better than most of the people running it. Kwon had not moved. His hands were still on the table, the glass forgotten. He was listening the way experienced men listen. Not just to the words, but to the spaces between them. The firm that handled the cover-up, Nnenna said. The one that buried the real access logs and made sure my name was the only one that appeared in the final report. She looked at Kwon steadily. They called themselves the Iron Sight Group. The change in the room was immediate. It wasn't loud. Kwon didn't stand up or raise his voice. But something behind his eyes shifted in a way that made the 2 guards near the door stand slightly straighter without being told to. Oh Jae-suk uncrossed his arms. Say that again, Kwon said quietly. Iron Sight Group, Nnenna repeated. Private military contractors. They market themselves as security consultants. But their actual business is access. They get inside organizations, corporations, protection details, government offices, plant their people, and then sell the vulnerability to whoever is paying. They don't pull triggers themselves. They just make sure the right people are standing in the wrong place when someone else does. Kwon reached into his jacket and placed a phone on the table. He turned it to face her. On the screen was a photograph, a company logo, clean and professional, a stylized crosshair inside a small geometric shape. Nnenna looked at it for a long moment. Where did you get this? She asked. It was found on a server connected to Bae Sung-jin's personal accounts 3 weeks ago, Kwon said. My intelligence team flagged it as a possible outside contractor. We didn't know what they were being contracted to do. His voice was controlled. But there was something cold and precise moving underneath it now. We assumed it was corporate espionage, financial interference. We didn't consider that they were already inside your protection detail, Nnenna said. Kwon looked at Oh Jae-suk. The big man's face had gone very still. The left door, Nnenna said carefully, not wanting to push too hard, but needing it said. Someone told you to watch the left door tonight, Jae-suk. Who gave you the updated positioning brief? The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Oh Jae-suk's voice came out low and rough. Bae Sung-jin's security coordinator. 2 hours before the dinner. He said there had been a credible threat report from the east entrance. The east entrance that doesn't exist on that floor, Nnenna said. Yes. Kwon sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. When he looked back down, the last trace of the humiliated, wine-stained man from the Emerald Room was completely gone. What remained was something harder and much more deliberate. They framed you, he said to Nnenna. Yes. And then one of their operations nearly killed me tonight. Yes. He nodded once slowly. The way a man nods when he has finished making a decision that is going to have very serious consequences for a number of people. It seems, Kwon Dae-Sung said, that you and I have the same problem. Bae Sung-jin made 3 mistakes in the 12 hours after the assassination attempt failed. The first was staying in the city. The second was using a phone he thought was clean. The third was underestimating the woman he had never once looked at directly during the dinner. Because she was carrying a tray and wearing an apron, and people like Dae-Sung had a very specific idea of who was worth paying attention to in a room. Nnenna had been counting on all three. She worked at the steel table in the safe house's back room. Kwon's laptop open in front of her and a second device. A signal analysis unit that Jae-suk had retrieved from Kwon's secondary supply cache, running quietly beside it. Kwon sat across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Watching her work with the focused patience of a man who had decided to trust someone and was now monitoring exactly how right or wrong that decision was going to turn out to be. She didn't explain everything as she worked. She explained enough. Iron Sight plants communication relays inside their target's networks before an operation, she said, pulling up a layered signal map on the screen. Not viruses, those get caught. They use dormant receiver nodes. Small. Passive. They sit inside normal traffic and only activate when they receive a specific frequency trigger. She pointed to a cluster of data on the left side of the screen. Dae-Sung triggered 140 minutes after he left the Gilded Lily. He signaled them, Kwon said. He reported in, Nnenna said. There's a difference. Signaling is short, a confirmation pulse, a location ping. Reporting takes longer because it carries content. She tapped the signal cluster. This transmission ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That's a debrief. Kwon was quiet for a moment. Can you read it? Not directly. The content is encrypted with a rotating key. It changes every 90 seconds, which means the window to intercept readable data is very small. She sat back. But I don't need to read the content. I need to read the pattern. She pulled up a second screen alongside the first. On it was a timeline, thin lines representing signal activity mapped against a 12-hour window. Every time Iron Sight runs an operation, their internal communications follow a specific rhythm. Check-in before, debrief after. Then a cooling period where all traffic drops to near zero while they assess the outcome and decide next steps. She traced the lines with her finger. Here is Bay's transmission. Here is the drop in traffic that follows. And here, she pointed to a small spike near the right edge of the timeline, is the response signal. 47 seconds long. Coming from a relay node inside the Harmon building. The same building as the sniper, Kwon said. The same building. Which means the shooter hasn't moved. They're waiting for extraction instructions. She looked at Kwon. Iron Sight doesn't leave their people behind. It's how they maintain loyalty. Whoever was on that balcony is still in that building, waiting for a signal that tells them how to get out of the city. Kwon leaned forward. Can you trigger that signal yourself? Nnenna almost smiled. I can do better than that. I can delay it. She pulled up a third window and began constructing what looked, to anyone without her specific background, like a completely ordinary piece of network maintenance code. It wasn't. It was a frequency mirror, a tool that would reflect Iron Sight's own response signal back into their relay node on a 12-minute loop, making the shooter believe their extraction instructions were still incoming while the actual signal went nowhere. It buys us time, she said. But that's not the important part. She turned the laptop to face Kwon. On the screen was a data log, communication records, timestamps, relay addresses, and at the top, cross-referenced against a personnel database Jae-suk had pulled from Kwon's private intelligence files, a name, Dae-Sung, with a chain of linked contacts that stretched back 18 months, past the failed summit in Busan, past Chitty's death, past the altered timestamps and the wiped access logs that had ended Nnenna's career and built Iron Sight's file on her like a coffin built around a living person. This is proof, Kwon said. This is the beginning of proof, Nnenna said. Enough to act on. Enough to make Dae-Sung understand that the people who hired him have a very well-established habit of leaving their loose ends behind. Kwon looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Get me Dae-Sung's current location, he said to Jae-suk. And bring the car around. The room they brought her to was on the 3rd floor of a building she suspected Kwon owned through at least 2 different company names. It had the feel of a place that officially didn't exist. No signage, no reception desk, no windows facing the street. Just clean walls, controlled lighting, and the quiet hum of serious equipment being maintained by people who didn't ask unnecessary questions. A man named Park was waiting inside. He was small and precise, with the careful movements of someone who treated every object he touched as though it had a specific correct way to be handled. He nodded at Nnenna when she entered and did not seem surprised to see her, which meant Kwon had made a call somewhere between the safe house and here. Kwon stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said, simply, whatever she needs. Then he left them to it. Park moved to a long steel cabinet against the far wall and began opening sections with a sequence of flat, efficient gestures. Nnenna stood still for a moment and looked at what was inside. She had not been in a room like this for 2 years. She had walked away from rooms like this deliberately, with both hands open, leaving everything behind because she had believed that carrying none of it was the only way to stay safe. Staying safe had turned out to mean staying small. And staying small had not, in the end, protected anyone. She stepped forward and began to work with Park in the quiet, professional way of two people who understand the same language without needing to speak much of it. The tactical vest was fitted and adjusted. Lightweight composite. Rated for the caliber she specified when Park asked without making it sound like a test. Communications equipment, a 2-channel earpiece, a throat mic. A relay unit small enough to sit flat against her forearm under a sleeve. A sidearm, which she checked cleared, and reloaded with the automatic movements of someone whose hands remembered things her mind had tried to forget. She stood in front of the narrow mirror on the cabinet door when it was done and looked at herself for a moment. The apron was gone. The careful invisibility she had worn like a second skin for 2 years was gone with it. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who had stopped pretending. It was uncomfortable. It was also, underneath the discomfort, something that felt dangerously close to relief. Kwon returned 20 minutes later with Oh Jae-suk and 2 other senior members of his inner security team. They gathered around the central table, where Nnenna had already laid out a building schematic and a personnel map cross-referenced against the signal data from the safe house. Iron Sight has 4 confirmed nodes inside your organization, she said, without preamble. 2 in the outer security rotation, 1 in your logistics coordination team, and 1 in your financial intelligence unit. The financial one is the most dangerous. They've had access to your movement schedules for at least 6 weeks, which is how they were able to plan the Gilded Lily operation with the precision they used. The room was very quiet. Oh Jae-suk looked at the personnel map. One of the names on it was someone he had worked alongside for 3 years. His expression didn't break, but something behind it did slightly, in a way that Nnenna recognized. The specific grief of discovering that a person you trusted was never quite the person you thought. I know, she said quietly to him specifically. It's not a reflection of your judgment. These people are professionals. Identifying them is what I was trained for. He nodded once. She moved on. We don't remove them all at once, she said. If the nodes go dark simultaneously, Ironsight's monitoring system flags it as a burn and they trigger a data wipe. We lose everything they've collected, and we lose our window to trace it back to their central operation. She looked at Kwon. We take them one at a time, in the right sequence, with a cover reason for each removal that Ironsight's system will read as routine. How long? Kwon asked. For days, Nnenna said. If everything holds. Kwon looked at her for a moment, at the vest, the equipment, the map she had built from scratch in the time it had taken him to make 2 phone calls. For days, he agreed. He looked at his team. She speaks for me, he said. In all matters relating to this operation. Her authority is mine. Nobody in the room questioned it. Not even Oh Jae-suk, which told Nnenna that Kwon was the kind of leader whose trust, once given, landed with weight. She looked back at the map and began to plan. For months later, the Emerald Room was full again. The chandelier burned the same soft gold. The dark wood panels had been refinished. The scent of fresh lacquer just barely detectable beneath the smell of expensive food and ceremonial soju. The long table was set with the same crystal glasses. The same white linen. The same careful arrangement of objects that signaled to everyone present that this was an occasion of weight and intention. The window had been replaced. Reinforced this time. Nnenna had specified the rating herself. She stood at Kwon's right hand and watched the room the way she had always watched rooms, counting exits, reading postures, measuring the small distances between what people showed and what they meant. The difference was that nobody in this room was pretending she wasn't there. The delegates could see her. The bodyguards knew her name. The 2 men stationed near the service entrance were people she had personally vetted, cleared, and briefed 40 minutes ago. She was not invisible tonight. She had decided, sometime during the 4 days it took to dismantle Iron Sight's network inside Kwon's organization. That Invisible had never actually been safe. It had just been lonely. The Iron Sight nodes had been removed cleanly, in sequence, exactly as she had planned. The logistics coordinator had been the easiest. A personnel reassignment dressed as a promotion, effective immediately, to an office in a city with no operational value. The financial intelligence contact had been harder. He had sensed something shifting and tried to trigger an early data transmission on the 3rd day. Nnenna had been ready for it. The signal went nowhere. He went quietly, in the end, because Kwon's people were very persuasive, and because Nnenna had built a file on him that left very little room for argument. Bae Sungjin had not gone quietly. But he had gone. The case against him, the communication logs, the signal data, the cross-referenced timestamps that connected him to the Busan summit and to Chitty's death and to the altered files that had ended Nnenna's career, had been delivered to 3 separate parties simultaneously. Kwon's legal team, an investigative journalist Nnenna trusted from her previous life, and a senior official in the Korean National Intelligence Service who had, it turned out, been building his own file on Iron Sight for 2 years and had been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence to act on it. Iron Sight's central operation had taken 11 days to unravel after that. Not because it was fragile, but because the people pulling it apart were very good at their work. Nnenna's name had been cleared in the same process, almost as a side effect, which was somehow both less and more meaningful than she had expected. Less, because a document saying she hadn't done something she always knew she hadn't done felt like a thin return for 2 years of silence and grief. More, because Chitty's file had been corrected alongside hers. His record said what it should have always said. That was the part that had made her stand very still in a hallway for a few minutes when she read it, until she was ready to move again. Now she stood straight in the Emerald Room and watched Hwang Min-kyu's replacement, a measured, careful man named Seo who had been thoroughly checked by Nnenna's own process, rise from his seat to begin the toast. Kwon glanced at her, just briefly. The look of a man checking a reading on an instrument he had learned to trust. She gave him the smallest nod. Room is clean. People are who they say they are. Exits are covered. You can raise your glass. He raised his glass. Seo spoke warmly about new foundations and the kind of trust that is built not in grand gestures, but in surviving difficult things together. It was a good speech. Nnenna listened to it with one part of her attention while the rest continued its quiet, steady work, scanning, measuring. Watching the room the way a person watches something they have decided to protect. The crystal rang softly as the glasses met across the table. Nobody spilled anything. Nobody needed to. Nnenna stood at Kwon Dae-Sung's right hand in a room full of powerful men and did not think about being invisible. She thought about Chitty, briefly and with the clean kind of sadness that has been properly grieved. She thought about the apron hanging in her locker at the Gilded Lily, which she had never gone back to collect. Then she thought about the room, and the exits and the work. Always the work.